The monkey orders room service.
Yes. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah, it won't be all that long before someone with a Neuralink device can communicate faster than someone who has a fully functional body. And the goal is to give people superpowers. We just want to be clear, there's only one person with a Neuralink chip in their brain. So for people out there who think we've put a chip in their brain, we'd like to assure you, for what it's worth, you probably won't believe us, but we did not put a chip in your brain, okay? Welcome to Neuralink live update. We're going to tell you about the progress of the first patient with the Neuralink, Roland, and sort of do a recap of the progress there. Then talk about what changes we're making for the second patient, which we're hoping to do an implant in the next week or so. And this is for our first product, which is called Telepathy, which enables you to control a computer or a phone just by thinking. So let's, in fact, so we'll start off with just some introductions. DJ, you want to start?
Hi, everyone. My name is DJ Sal. I'm an electrical engineer and a chip designer by training. I led the design of several generations of the Neuralink implant. Currently, I was on the founding team and currently a president.
I'm Matthew McDougall. I'm a practicing neurosurgeon and head of neurosurgery at Neuralink.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Neil, head of brain interfaces applications.
And I'm Bliss. I'm a software engineer at Neuralink, trying to figure out how to turn brain activity into cool stuff in the world.
All right, thank you. Well, so let's see. So we'll just get going into the presentation. So our first product is something, like I said, we call Telepathy, which enables the person with the Neuralink implant to control their phone or computer just by thinking. And once you can control your phone or computer, you can essentially control almost anything, literally just by thinking. So there's no eye tracking or anything. It is purely your thoughts. This is really quite a profound device that can help a lot of people who have lost the connection between their brain and body. So imagine people like Stephen Hawking, who imagine if he could communicate at the same speed as someone who still had the connection to their brain and body. So it's really something that can help millions of people around the world, and it's part of our overall goal of enabling a very high bandwidth connection between the brain and the rest of the world and your computers. The long-term goal, which sounds a little esoteric, is to mitigate the risk of the civilizational risk of AI by having a sort of closer symbiosis between human intelligence and digital intelligence. But that'll take many years. Along the way, we're going to help solve a lot of brain injury or spinal injury issues. And then with our first product, Telepathy, that's going to be really quite profound. There is also potential long-term for bridging the gaps. So if there are damaged or severed neurons, being able to span the gap between the brain's motor cortex to the spine to enable someone to use their body again. I think that would be very exciting, and it's that is something that is possible in the long term. And then our second product, which we've demonstrated to work with monkeys, is Blindsight, which would enable someone who is completely blind, lost both eyes, or completely lost their optic nerve to be able to see. So that's something that we hope to demonstrate in the future. So this just gives you a sense of what the device is. A way to think about the Neuralink device is kind of like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch with tiny wires or electrodes. Those tiny wires are implanted in the brain, and they read and write electrical signals. So a lot of people think the brain is this incredibly mysterious thing. It is mysterious in a lot of ways, but it is actually it does operate with electrical signals. So if you can read and write those electrical signals, you can interface with the brain. And the device is sized so that it is the same size as the piece of skull that is removed. So if it's like a few centimeters diameter, of skull that's removed. We replace that with the device after implanting the tiny wires with the surgical robot, and that enables read-write capability to the neurons.
Completely wirelessly.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. It's completely wirelessly. So, like, I could have a Neuralink right now. You wouldn't know. And it charges inductively, so you could just basically have an electromagnetic pad that you charge the device with. So, yeah, it's like an Apple Watch, exactly. So,
except that it's actually a much harder technical challenge to solve, given that there's limit as to how much you eat the brain tissue. Whereas for phones and
have a hot watch,
you don't
whatever.
actually really care how much if it's sitting on a table.
Sure.
So
it's got to go through skin and stuff as well in our case. So it is a tougher challenge to charge and to have high bandwidth communications, given that it's got to go through skin and hair and stuff.
But we have solved it.
But we have solved it, yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, so our first step with the telepathy is basically to unlock digital independence for people with paralysis and to allow them control the computer just with their mind without moving their body. And our goal is to provide them the same level of control, functionality, and reliability that I have when I'm using a computer. Even better than the level of control I have.
It's not a high bar for you. Actually, just to be clear, this guy, he's controlling this with his brain. So he's not, like, you can't see his hands in this video, but he's not using a mouse and keyboard. Just, thinking about how to move the cursor and playing Civilization 6.
No eye tracker.
Right, there's no eye tracking.
From
he's live streaming.
This is just thinking. That's it.
Just thinking.
This is just a couple days
like
ago.
cursor move here.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like last night or 2 nights ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the way he also described it is he's using
Yeah.
He has many more videos on his on the platform. Definitely check them out. So he's streaming that live and also can talk and like move his head without multitasking.
Yeah, you can also, like, if you join this live stream, you can ask him questions. He'll tell you all about what it's like to move. Right.
Also, I think I haven't played Civilization myself, but I think this is actually not easy mode. This is expert mode.
This is Emperor mode. Yeah.
Emperor mode.
If you have played Civ, Emperor mode is like the highest difficulty level. Just the point is, like, this is a cognitively demanding task while live streaming, playing the hardest mode of the game, and he's able to do that while moving the cursor.
Talking, engaging with the audience.
Yeah.
One of the other games he likes to play a lot is chess. I think it gets lost sometimes that he's actually playing speed chess.
Against me, yeah.
Which requires an incredibly high fidelity degree of control and speed of control in order to be able to win.
So also another cool stuff about our device is that you can use it anywhere, anytime. Also on a plane during a flight while creating really cool memes of cats. Also, our device unlocks things that previously were impossible for our participant. For example, we're able to connect him to his gaming console, Switch, and play Mario Kart with friends and family. And it was lovely to see them playing together after years that he couldn't do it since his injury.
Imagine if you're sitting a row over from this guy on a plane. You look over, he's making a cat meme. No hands, no movement. Yeah.
Live in a weird world.
Yeah, it's strange time.
Yeah, and he loves using the device and using it independently daily to watch videos, read, play games, using the browser. And the key metrics that we care is to make sure our device is actually useful is basically the amount of hours you use the device daily and weekly, and we track it weekly since the surgery. And on weeks that he's not too busy and not traveling, he can even reach 70 hours of using the device a week. This is amazing. He would, of course, love to use it more, but need to run research sessions. He needs to sleep sometimes, and also, of course, to charge the device once in a while. Hopefully, we'll improve that over time.
I think that maybe not obvious to people who are watching this. Like, it's a normal MacBook he's controlling. This isn't like some limited edition thing where there's only a few options. Like, you can just do anything that you can do on a MacBook Pro. Same one I have on my desk, actually. It's the exact same one.
And maybe another interesting point is that on the first day he used BCI, brain control, he was able to break the previous world record for cursor control used by using the brain. And recently, he even doubled it and was able to outperform about 10% of our engineered Neuralink. And you can be sure that we are very good in this game and very quick. And if you want to check out how well you can do it on our website. And it's very addictive games.
Yeah, it's a very simple game. You just have to click on the square, but it's actually, even though it sounds silly, it's quite a, yeah, it can be quite it sounds like it can be quite addictive, and it's especially if you get a low score and you think there's no way I gotta. So I mean, anyone who wants to try this, I recommend going to the Neuralink.com website and seeing if you can beat Nolan's record, and it's that you will find that's actually quite difficult to do so. And this is really with version 1 of the device and with only a small percentage of the electrodes that are working. So this is really just the beginning, but even the beginning is twice as good as the world record. This is important to emphasize. The media has a habit of saying that the glass is 10% empty, but actually it's 90% full. So I think it's really quite an accomplishment of the Neuralink team to have achieved with the first patient, the first device, twice the world record for the brain-to-computer bandwidth. That's really an astonishing, an amazingly great outcome, and it's only going to get better from here. So the potential is to ultimately get, I think, to megabit level. So that's part of the long-term goal of improving the bandwidth of the brain-computer interface. If you think about like how low the bandwidth normally is between a human and a device, the average bandwidth is extremely low. It's I'd say less than 1 bit per second over the course of a day. So if there are 86,400 seconds in a day, you're outputting less than that number of bits to any given device, except in perhaps very rare circumstances. So this is actually quite important for AI, basically for human AI symbiosis, is just being able to communicate at a speed the AI can follow.
So yeah, just to emphasize again, he's performing at this extremely high level with about 15% of his channels functional. And so we want to mitigate any of the problems that led to that situation. So, the brain is a fascinating organ. Share with you some of the secrets about the brain. During any typical brain surgery, a small amount of air is introduced into the skull. That's because neurosurgeons like to have as much room as possible around the brain. And so there's this little known control mechanism of allowing the CO2 concentration in the blood to rise a bit, which allows the brain to either expand or contract depending on where you target that CO2. So typically neurosurgeons will have the brain shrink by lowering CO2. What we're going to do in our future surgeries is keep the CO2 concentration actually quite normal, maybe even slightly elevated. And that'll allow the brain to stay its normal size and shape during surgery. That should eliminate this air pocket that we saw in the first participant. That air pocket, we think, may have contributed to eating up some of the thread slack as the air bubble migrated to be under the implant, push the brain away from the implant. And so that's easy enough to fix. Another consideration that we want to focus on for our upcoming participants is that the brain, think of it like a really complex folded onion. It's layer upon layer of sheets of neurons all over the surface of the brain, folded into this odd-looking shape. The folds of the brain travel down deep into the brain, and along with it go those onion layers of neurons. And if we insert very close to one of the folds where there may be very useful information encoded in neurons, we may end up traveling with our threads parallel to some of the layers of neurons that we're most interested in, avoiding them entirely. To avoid that possibility, we're going to insert in our future participants more close to the middle of the apex of the folds. ensuring that we're crossing the layers of interest, layer 5 of the cortex.
I also think that it's important to highlight here those tiny wires that Elon mentioned. They're a fraction of a human hair. They're very flexible, intentionally so, because brain's constantly moving, and you want the electrodes to be moving with the brain, causing less of the scarring. And it's actually impossible for a human neurosurgeon, however talented Matthew is, to actually maneuver them. So we have a surgical robot that we built that can actually precisely target them in any three-dimensional space, X, Y, as well as Z, with micron level precision, while avoiding vasculature so that you don't disrupt and cause immune response from happening. So we actually have the technology to be able to place them exactly where we want them in 3D.
Yeah, it was truly amazing to see the surface of the brain after the robot had inserted all the electrodes on the first participant without a drop of blood in sight. It was really quite an achievement.
Yes, so something that probably most people don't realize is that the brain appears to be sort of somewhat undifferentiated. So if you look at the cortex, it looks like a whole bunch of folds that where, maybe like that. It's not obvious just looking at, say, a picture of the brain that the brain is highly differentiated. That there's you pretty much know exactly where the part of the brain is that controls your right hand and your left hand and your leg and that kind of thing, or vision. It's actually quite precisely located. It's not. So some people might think, look at the brain like, oh, it could be anywhere, but actually it's your brain is highly differentiated, even though it doesn't look it. It's yeah.
So, do you want to describe how we actually how we identify where to drill the cranium?
Yeah, so we can put a patient that is considering this implant into an fMRI, so a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, and ask them to imagine hand movements that, because of the spinal cord injury, don't happen. But just imagining those hand movements causes these areas of the brain to light up in the fMRI scanner. And so we have a pretty good idea, based in fact, for each individual participant, which part of their brain is going to respond to imagined movements of the hand. And so we can map those imagined movements, much as we all do when moving a mouse, to controlling a cursor on a screen, even without the use of a mouse.
Yeah, but anyway, I think this is kind of an important point that it's not like the part of your brain that controls your hand might be anywhere in the cortex. This is not the case. It's going to be in a very specific region, and it's going to be extremely common across people.
Precision is key too.
Yeah.
The left-handed, right-handed thing blew my mind too. Like if you're right-handed, you want the device on the left side.
Yeah.
You want the lateral side to dominate.
Yeah, the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body.
Yeah, everything's.
Yeah.
Another of the risk mitigations we're looking at in the future is that the implant has a certain size. The depth of the bottom of the implant is actually thinner than the average human skull. And so what we want to be able to do is control the size of the gap under the implant, give the threads that travel from the implant into the brain as much slack as possible. We didn't do this in the first participant because we didn't want to manipulate any of their tissue that we didn't absolutely have to. In upcoming implants, our plan is to sort of sculpt the surface of the skull very intentionally to minimize the gap under the implant, such that the bottom of the implant travels perfectly flush with the normal contour of the inner side of the skull. That will put the implant closer to the brain. It will eliminate some of the tension on the threads, and we think it will reduce some of the tendency of threads to retract the brain.
And we actually built a tool to do.
Right. Yeah, this is a very important detail. You really want the inner contour of the skull to be flush, so that the implant there's no the brain doesn't want to pucker up into the gap. That's really quite a big deal. So it's like minimizing the air pocket and the implant being flush with the inside contour of the skull are two very important improvements.
The additional benefit here is that you do see some amount of stick up, what we call stick up, so you minor bump in the head, but this actually eliminates that even further.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like really our goal is that if you run your hand over the top of the skull, you don't feel any bump, you don't feel any device, and that even if someone was bald, you wouldn't really even notice it. And then from the inner contour of the skull, the brain, from a physical standpoint, doesn't really notice that there's a divot in the skull because there's no divot.
Okay, another aspect of the human brain that obviously differs from any of the animals that we tested in is that the human brain is a lot bigger, and so you may not realize that means the human brain moves quite a bit more than any of these other smaller brained creatures. And so when we open the skull, we see the brain travel toward and away from the robot about 3 millimeters in total as the heart beats and the breathing takes place. And so that movement, it adds a small challenge for the robot in precisely choosing a depth to insert each thread. It's not an enormous challenge, and we've already upgraded the robot's capabilities to be able to even more precisely target depth in even a very rapidly moving brain with a high amplitude of movement. You may think the most obvious mitigation for threads that pulled out of the brain is to insert them deeper. We think so too. And so we're going to broaden the range of depths at which we insert threads. So, for the very first participant, we had an enormous amount of data from our animal work, and we had very highly optimized our insertion depth to maximize the crossing of the layers of interest in the cortex with the electrodes that we're recording from. Now that we know retraction is a possibility, we're going to insert at a variety of depths that even in several cases of differing amounts of retracting threads, we're going to have electrodes at the proper depth. And with the deepest threads, be able to track how much retraction has occurred across the surface of the brain from each thread. And so we're going to both have more threads in the right layer and have better data on how much retraction has occurred.
If you're a BCI nerd, you might know that being able to control individual Z depth per thread is not something that most neural interface devices offer. Most neural interface devices are kind of a static, fixed, rigid array that you push in, and all the electrodes are at one depth.
Right.
To be able to do this is actually pretty novel part of the robot.
Yeah, the historical approach is to actually pound in a sort of bed of nails with an air hammer into the brain.
It looks crazy. That is just with a pneumatic hammer. This is. It sounds somewhat barbaric. This is not what we do, but this is what's been done before. Is literally just hammering in what looks like a bed of nails into the brain, which even actually works. It's astonishing that it actually works at all. But
I mean, some people have manual, like DBS probes, you're just sticking in by hand. Neurosurgeons just guiding it.
So those are several orders of magnitude more volume of brain tissue that you're destroying compared to what we're doing.
But that deep brain stimulation stuff does actually work, and it actually helps people a lot.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
That's a great product.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we'll be able to do a much more finessed version of that down the road. I mean, it's really difficult. Like the Neuralink device is something that really absolutely minimizes damage to the brain, absolutely minimizes the load on the patient, and the goal is to allow someone to live a completely normal life. You won't even notice that someone even has the device. So, like I said, restoring the ability to control your computer and phone. That's our telepathy, and then next device being able to allow people to see that could not see before. And in fact, you could allow people to see, kind of like Geordi LaForge in Star Trek, in whatever
infrared.
Yeah, infrared, ultraviolet, radar. So I think another way of saying it is that we want to give people superpowers. So it's not just that we're restoring your prior brain functionality, but that you actually have functionality far greater than a normal human. That's a super big deal.
And I also think, oftentimes the questions that we get a lot is, why do you have to actually go into the brain? What if you place it on the surface or outside the skull? Basically, the long story short, the physics of how it works, you really need to get the sensors, which are these placing in the brain, next to the source, which neuron as close to it as possible. Otherwise, what you get is you get a population response, and not be able to kind of do the level of controls that we believe.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a good sort of analogy would be like if you're trying to understand what goes on in a factory, you kind of need to go into the factory. You can't just put a stethoscope on the wall and try to figure out what's going on. Like anything on the outside of trying to read things from the outside is like putting a stethoscope on the wall of a factory trying to understand what's going on in the factory. It's not going to be effective.
At the end of
You got to be threads have got to be in there. But I just want to emphasize again, like the goal is to give people superpowers, not just to restore prior functionality. So I think it's very exciting, and I think that should give hope to a lot of people in the world that the future is going to be exciting and inspiring, and the technology is going to give them superpowers. I mean, that's amazing. Can you multitask with it? Yeah, in fact, if you look at Nolan's streaming, and you can just check out Nolan's streams on the X platform. He's multitasking all the time, so he's playing video games while talking and
listening to podcasts.
Listening to podcasts. Yeah, exactly. So it's really